Good afternoon. My name is Janie Montblanc, and I am the coordinator for the Great Basin Science Delivery Project. Welcome to the fourth webinar in our Sagebrush Step Treatment Evaluation Project series, titled How Does Tree Dominance Affect Understory Responses to Pinyon-Juniper Fuel Control Treatments, presented by Dr. Bruce Roundy from Brigham Young University. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to let you know that you may ask questions at any time during this webinar by typing them into the questions pane of your control panel at the top right of your screen. I will field questions for Dr. Roundy after the presentation. I also want to give you a heads up that during the questions period I will be submitting 3 brief poll questions about the webinar. Your input is greatly appreciated. Thank you. Now I would like to introduce our presenter. Bruce Roundy is a rangeland ecologist and professor of wildlife and wildland conservation at Brigham Young University. His research projects include establishment ecology of weeds and native plants, vegetation disturbance thresholds for management of sagebrush systems, watershed responses to management practices, and increasing diversity of fire rehabilitation and other range seedings. He has been an integral part of the Sagebrush Step Treatment Evaluation Project, which evaluates methods of sagebrush step restoration and fuel management in the Great Basin. Welcome, Bruce, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you all for tuning in to this webinar. I'd like to just acknowledge the other woodland principal investigators, and seems like I just lost my screen.
Oh, well, I just made you the presenter.
Okay, great. Okay. So, Rick Miller, Robin Tausch, Gene Chambers, and myself, and many of the site managers who helped collect the data, also some BYU students I'd like to acknowledge, Kurt Young, who helped me a lot with data analysis, and April, who's helped with quite a few different things. As you look at applying fuel control treatments on the ground, you have this kind of wave of invasion, this invasion gradient that's obvious in some sites. In other places you have quite a bit of variation in tree dominance, but you're applying at large-scale acreages and you're asking these questions. Is this the right time to apply? What's our priority? Should we apply where we got a lot of cover? Should we do it before we get too much cover? What treatment should we use, and does it make a difference? A lot of these questions and where you should treat and so on have been addressed in these Western Juniper and Pinyon-Juniper field guides, mainly authored by Rick Miller and Robin Tausch, and those are available on the SageStep website. You can order a hard copy or get a PDF, and encourage you to get those, and they should be useful management tools to you. As we look at the research context of this experiment, or this question of what type of treatments we should apply and how we should apply them, this resilience-based model is the one that we use. And so we consider, as these trees are invading into sagebrush steppe, that they eventually infill and get to a fairly high tree cover. And we ask ourselves a question, if we treat at an intermediate stage or later, will it make a difference in what eventually comes out is the outcome for these communities? We like to treat them so that they go back to perennial shrubs and grasses and forbs and supply the diversity services of our ecosystem. On the other hand, if we wait too late and we get either a prescribed fire or a wildfire, will it go through a threshold? It's fairly obvious to us where some of these sites have gone through a threshold. They've had catastrophic fire. There weren't enough residuals to respond. Cheatgrass became dominant, and then we crossed this biotic threshold and went into a cheatgrass-dominated system and recurrent fire. So we know that can happen. And that's an obvious threshold crossing to us. What's less obvious in this resilience-based management model is what happens when you fool around up here in the community phase of state 1 And do you reinforce what you want, or do you end up going toward what you don't want, an eventual obvious threshold? So that's one of the questions we're addressing here with this sage step research. So we have sites spread across the Great Basin, and for those of you who aren't familiar, I'll kind of bring you up to snuff on that. We have 4 western juniper sites that I'll mainly present the data from today, as well as 3 pinyon-juniper sites in central Nevada and 4 juniper-pinyon sites in Utah. And I'll present data mainly from the 3rd year since treatment. That'll be the main data that I present for vegetation today. However, we have a range of data ranging from pre-treatment to 3 or 4 years post-treatment. And the way it works is the treatments that we applied on all of our sites were control, do nothing, burn, or cut and drop. And in Utah, on those 4 sites in Utah, we added a 4th treatment because we do a lot of shredding here. We added this bullhog shredding treatment. So those will be the treatments that we'll be talking about. We also collected soil moisture data on a range of sites. To familiarize you with the sites a little bit, the western juniper sites, those 4 sites are mainly in the Malheur High Plateau. We do have one in the upper Snake River, Bridge Creek. And so they have western juniper, mainly mountain big sagebrush. Bridge Creek has basin, big sagebrush. And our understory is grasses is Idaho fescue, usually sandbird bluegrass, and blue bunch or Thurber's needlegrass. So those are the main understory components that we have in the western juniper sage step sites. The pinyon juniper sites, and I'll talk about data from 3 of them. They're all within the central Nevada basin and range, major land resource area. They have mountain big sagebrush or Wyoming big sagebrush. They tend to be cooler, cooler or frigid and aeritic or xeric, as opposed to the western juniper that was frigid or mesic soil temperature regime and aeritic to xeric soil moisture regimes. But again, Wyoming big sagebrush or on 7 Mile mountain big sagebrush, and blue bunch or Thurber's and sandbergs in the understory. The Utah juniper pinyon sites are all in the Salt Lake area or basin, and those tend to be warm, mesic or frigid. Stansbury is classified as cool mesic. We'll see it's a little warmer than its classification later. And those tend to be mainly Wyoming big sagebrush, although Stansbury has mountain big sagebrush. And again, blue bunch wheatgrass is usually what's there. However, at Greenville Bench, needle and thread grass is also there. Well, as you look at understory loss as trees infill and increase their dominance, it's useful to define some type of vegetation index. And Robin Tausch has defined this tree dominant index. So what you do is you measure tree cover, and then you divide it by the tree cover plus shrub plus tall perennial grass cover. And now these are the major resource users in the community. And this works out as a pretty good vegetation index of tree dominance that I'll be reporting. So every time I say tree dominance index, it's this tree cover divided by tree plus shrub plus tall perennial grass. We've known, and it works in many systems, that as woody plant abundance increases, you tend to lose your understory. And Archer's recent review of this in his brush management chapter for the SEEP analysis, the Conservation Evaluation and Assessment Program, he presented 3 different curves. And so you can get these different responses. For example, you can get an increase in herbaceous cover with increasing tree dominance if the trees modify some stressor variable like soil temperature. This happens for Weisach and Texas wintergrass, where at a certain point you increase wintergrass growth because the Weisach is modifying the soil temperature in the winter. But usually the response that you get is either a linear or some curvilinear, implying some bit of a threshold. As woody plant abundance increases, your understory starts dropping out. These photos down here below show Underdown Canyon in the Shoshone Mountains, famous pictures taken by Robin Tausch, and here you have in the 1970s and in the 2000s, 34 years later, and you're getting this infilling occurring where the trees are growing up and dominating the understory. Up in your right-hand corner here, I've got relative cover for the sagebrush, for the sage steppe woodland sites. This is from actual data from when before we treated and subplots we measured on all the sites. And what you see is of all the cover there, as your tree dominance index increases, the trees are really squeezing out the system. They're dominating the cover. They're using most of the resources. So this is tree relative cover here. Shrubs, they're really dropping out of the system as the trees close in. The tall grasses hang in there a little bit better. Short grasses hang in there really fairly good, maybe because Sandberg's bluegrass grows earlier and doesn't compete with the trees for soil moisture as much as the shrubs or tall grasses. Forbs also are squeezed out, and there's cheatgrass also on the site, but not a lot of it at this point. The trees are the big ones that are dominating resource use on the site. Now, Rick Miller and Robin Tausch have defined these categories of invasion, and that's helpful for management to categorize things. But it's really a continuum, and you can categorize these phases as when the trees, their relative cover is less than a third of the total perennial cover. When both trees and other perennials like shrubs and grasses and forbs share the relative cover, then it would be phase 2. And then as you're getting into the upper stages of infilling, where the trees have more than 2/3 of the perennial cover. But it's really a continuum. And these are actual sage steppe subplots that I plotted here. The green circles are tree cover, and you notice the tree cover is fairly similar at the early stages of invasion, and then it spreads out quite a bit. The variability among sites and subplots is quite a bit at the upper stages. This would be reflecting actual abiotic conditions of the site that the trees are responding to here. On the other hand, the herbaceous perennial, or the perennial understory, is widespread out as the trees have very little influence, and then the cover tightens up substantially as the trees are dominating cover and taking away resources from them. So this is what you actually see, and then you come in and overlay some treatment at some stage of this tree dominance continuum. Remember that every site has an environmental context that's driven by its climate. That could be its function of its elevation and location, its aspect, and annual weather. That feeds into the soil moisture and temperature regime for the site, which is especially important in the cold desert. Perennials will respond to that, and cheatgrass will respond to that. Some sites are more suited to cheatgrass invasion, and some sites are less suited. So you have the environmental requirements for germination, growth, and seed production of cheatgrass that translates into the propagule pressure that it exerts every year and the cover that it has every year. And that's also controlled by the perennials on the site that are also using the resources. Then you overlay a disturbance and you make soil moisture more available. Now it's kind of who's going to be in the best position to use these resources and respond. And does the type of treatment matter? So that's what we're looking at here. We have a biotic and an abiotic context, and then we overlay a disturbance and we get a certain outcome. And looking at the generalized hydrology of the pinyon-juniper system, A lot of the moisture that comes in precipitation ends up as evapotranspiration. If trees or shrubs or grasses don't use it, a lot of it's going to be evaporated back into the atmosphere. And so when you remove the major resource user in the system, the tree, you would expect to get quite a bit more evaporation or availability of moisture for the other remaining components of the system. So if you look at these things, you have a fairly simple treatment effect when you do mechanical or fire treatments. If you leave it undisturbed, you're leaving the trees in there, and you're going to have a negative effect on soil water that will eventually play out in loss of your shrubs and herbaceous perennials with infilling. If you burn, you take out the trees and shrubs, but if your burn's not too hot, you should leave the herbaceous perennials. So here you've taken out two major water users and left the others, as well as invasives. Cutting or shredding, on the other hand, leaves the shrubs and should not be too hard on the herbaceous perennials. And you should expect to get an increase in soil water availability with all of these treatments. So to measure that, we put out many soil moisture stations, and we sited them at different locations at different phases, phase 1, 2, and 3 of infilling across our treatments. Across most of the network, those were control, burn, and cut, and in juniper-pinyon, we also instrumented the shred treatment where we had sufficient equipment. If you look at these sites and just look at precipitation, since we've been keeping track of it from our MET stations, they don't necessarily group out regionally really neatly. You know, they're kind of all over the map. And they do cluster up a little bit, and I'll show you that later. But I think I mainly just wanted to show you here that there's quite a bit of variability, and most of the years we've measured since treatment, our precipitation, except for last year or maybe the year before, was less than the PRISM average. If you look at air temperature, you know, we've got some cold spots here at Walker Butte, and some central Nevada sites are a little cool. 7 Mile and Marking Corral. Utah is kind of warm, but it's similar to South Ruby in Nevada. And then here's the western juniper sites here. So it's not obvious which sites are like the other ones from looking at these diagrams. So I've done a little bit of ordination, and it's preliminary, and these sites, at least 9 of them, did group out kind of interestingly, and this was done mainly with soil water availability and soil temperature variables. And so we're going from drier to wetter here. And so here are 2 western juniper sites, Divine Ridge, and then here's a pinyon juniper site, South Ruby. They're grouped out as being kind of wetter and cooler. Bridge Creek's the Upper Snake River western juniper site, and it grouped out with Scipio and Stansbury in Utah as being a little warmer and wetter. And then we have Greenville Bench, which was the southernmost Utah site down by Beaver, Juniper-Onapee, which is just west of Salt Lake, and Marking Corral, which is over in central Nevada west of Ely, that kind of group out as kind of being cooler and drier. So there is some similarity, but it doesn't always group out by region here. However, across this entire region, we found that killing trees increases available soil water, and it increases at most where you have phase 3. So these are years after treatment, and we have different stations. Here we have more stations reporting here. But what you're seeing is in March through June at 13 to 30 centimeters in phase 3 juniper, when you burned it, cut it, or shred it, you got about another day, another month of soil moisture availability in about 20 days at phase 2, and about a week if you did it at phase 1, which makes sense because you have a lot of shrubs and grasses left at phase 1 to use that soil moisture. Over time that decreases, but it's still hanging in there. Still at 4 years out, we've got about 20 more days of available moisture than the control treatment had if we cut or shred or burn. And those resources then are going to become available to what's there to use it. So one of the big questions that we have here is, does it really matter if we burn or cut or shred here versus here or versus there? Do we dare wait till here to do that? And that's the big question I'll address now. And understand this is initial response. These data are only 3 years after treatment at most. And so we went out and our subplots, we have enough subplots in these treatments that we have this continuum of infilling and tree dominance so that we could do what we call an analysis of covariance. And what we found is that it does matter. We found in statistical terms an interaction between the treatment and the tree dominance index. In other words, whether one treatment varied from another as far as shrub, perennial grass, or cheatgrass cover, that depended on the tree dominant index when the area was treated. So we did find that interaction, and that's mainly what I'll report here to you. So first looking at shrub cover, and on all these graphs, tree dominant index, phase 1, open, phase trees and understory sharing the cover here in the middle, and then high tree cover on the right end. So what I'm giving you here is the third year cover minus the pre-treatment cover. So it kind of calibrates for each site and takes into account differences among sites. And what we see here, and this isn't going to surprise any of you, but if we go out and burn, we're going to have the biggest loss of shrub cover at the lower tree dominant index because we had more shrubs to start off with. And it makes less of a difference as you get higher tree cover because there's less shrubs there to burn and lose. On the other hand, cutting and dropping did not decrease shrub cover at all. It didn't necessarily significantly increase it, but the trend is up. And that's pretty obvious. You go in and cut trees and you leave the shrubs. If you do a burn like this small Stansberry prescribed burn, it's going to take out the shrubs, and they're going to have to come back from seedlings. How about the tall perennial grass? Again, third year minus the pre-treatment. So what we're seeing with fire is we get a trend, an increasing trend, and it's greater at the higher tree dominant index because a little bit of an increase will make a bigger difference there because we had less trees to start off, or less tall perennial grass cover to start off with. But the cutting produces quite a substantial increase in tree cover, and it's highest at your higher tree dominant index. So we're seeing some benefits there. Short grass cover like Poa secunda, there was really no significant difference among treatments, and there was no significant interaction with the tree dominant index. In other words, it didn't really make a difference whether you cut, burned, or shredded, and it didn't make a difference at what infilling or tree dominance you did it. Fairly resistant to the treatments 3 years out. Total perennial grass cover again was increased, and most at high tree dominance index by fire, and even more so by cutting. So cutting looks like a good treatment to benefit your tall perennial grass. Here's total perennial herbaceous cover. This includes the forbs and all the rhizomaceous and short and tall bunch grasses. And again, you see the same response. Fire improves cover a little bit over pre-treatment, but cutting improves it by about 10 to 12% at the higher tree dominance index. So that was the good news. The bad news, of course, and this isn't going to surprise any of you, but when you go out and treat these systems, you're going to get an increase in cheatgrass, and more so for burning than for cutting. It starts at a lower tree dominant index for when you burn, than when you cut. But at the end, at the higher tree dominant index, you equally have higher cheatgrass cover. And across the sites, it's not too bad. I mean, we're only up to about 5 or 6% increase, but it's still concerning on some sites. Now, what I've done in these graphs is I've tried to show you where there were statistically significant differences. So here we have tree dominant index across the bottom. I've divided these up into phase 1, 2, and 3, and then I'll do a comparison of the different treatments, and it just kind of reiterates what I've already shown you. So here we're comparing the control and the burn, and where it's red, the burn shows that there were significantly there was significantly less shrub cover after the burn than pre-treatment compared to the control. So what you're really seeing here is burning significantly decreases shrubs at phase 1 into phase 2. It increases tall grass from about mid-phase 1 on up. You might say, why doesn't it do it at a lower phase 1? Well, there's already a lot of tall grass there, and so you're going to get the most increase where you take out the shrubs and trees and benefit the residual tall grasses. No difference with short grass. Across all perennial grasses, no difference. With perennial forbs, increased it a little bit up here at phase 3 on the upper end. Across total perennial herbaceous, from about upper phase 3 on up was increased. And total perennial includes the shrubs, so it mimics the shrubs, and fire reduced cover the early phases but less at the mid phases, and increased it actually a little bit at the upper phases. And then fire increased cheatgrass relative to the control from about mid phase 1 on up. So you know what we're seeing is the burn is having a beneficial effect on tall grasses and cheatgrass, and a negative effect on shrubs. This is comparing the control and the cut in the same way, and you don't see any red here because in no instance did the cut treatment produce lower cover than the control, or difference since pre-treatment. It had no effect on shrub cover, didn't significantly increase or decreased it. Increased tall grass cover about mid-phase 1 and up, just like burning did. No effect on short grass. However, perennial grass cover, which didn't show an increase, a significant increase with burning, does show up as significantly better with cutting at about mid-phase 2 and on up. Perennial forbs, cutting increased that at upper phase 3. Perennial herbaceous and total perennial cover at about phase 2 and phase 3, and it increased cheatgrass starting at about phase 2 and on up. If you compare the burn and the cut in the same way, of course for shrubs, burning decreased shrub cover, so the cut is significantly better than the burn. Here for shrub cover, it's a little bit better at upper phase 3 for tall grass and total perennial cover, mainly because of the shrubs. And pretty much the same as burning for everything else. But a little bit of a perennial herbaceous benefit, and also definitely a shrub cover benefit from cutting or shredding compared to burning. And what about the shred? Did it differ with the cut? And this is second year Utah data only because we lost one of our sites by the third year. So I wanted to include all the sites I could, and by the second year, and it's generally consistent for the third year, there's really no difference between cutting and shredding for any of these life platforms across tree dominance. With perennial forb, it happened that we got a little bit more benefit from cutting at upper phase 3 than we did from shredding. So we'll watch that and see what that turns out to be. So those were differences with 3 years after treatment or 2 years after and pre-treatment. What do these communities actually look like today? So here's the control, and this doesn't have tree cover in it, but the understory is mainly shrubs and perennial herbaceous. There was very little cheatgrass. And now after we've burned them, what do we have? Well, we've lost most of our shrubs. We have a few shrubs left here at lower tree dominant index because there were more of them there to begin with. The perennial herbaceous component has increased and the cheatgrass component has increased, but we're still winning here. Now, we had the greatest increase in perennial herbaceous and tall grass cover at the higher tree dominant index, but that doesn't mean we have more absolute cover there because we just had less to start off with. But it's hanging in there, and it seems to be increasing, as is cheatgrass. So prescribed fire decreased shrub cover at phases 1 and 2, but it increased herbaceous cover at phases 2 and 3, and cheatgrass increased after fire at all the phases. Looking at the cut and drop, after you've cut and dropped or shredded these trees, you still have the shrub component, although it's small up here. Your perennial herbaceous component is still a major part of the cover out there, and cheatgrass is starting to come in about phase 2 and 3. So these communities, as they look right now, are not bad, even at a high phase 3, especially with the cut and drop and the shred. We've maintained the shrub cover. We've increased the perennial herbaceous cover, phases 2 and 3, but the cheatgrass cover has also started to increase. And mechanical treatments have preserved the shrubs and increased produced a little bit higher total perennial cover at phases 2 and 3 than the burn. What happens when you do these treatments to the resources? Because we live in a cold desert and these systems are controlled by temperature and soil moisture availability, a good index of that is what we call wet degree days in the spring, and that's accumulated time above 0 degrees C when the soil is wet. And our MET data gives us this variable, and so I thought I'd present it. It looks like rising balloons here. So what we have is our locations on the x-axis here, and wet degree days by treatment here. So these are in groups of 3. For example, the Blue Mountain here, this is the control wet degree days, this is the burn, this is the cut wet degree days, and so on. The brown is shred, and it shows up on the Utah sites over here on the right. So what you see as you look at these is you often increase the wet degree days. So you increase not only soil moisture, but you have a beneficial effect on temperature by burning or cutting or shredding. And so your wet degree days are greater in the spring by these treatments, cutting, shredding, burning. And for most of the sites, not every site, Divine Ridge was a little bit of an exception, but for most of the sites you're getting an increase in wet degree days. We've also instrumented microsites, and we found you got a greater increase in wet degree days associated with tree drip lines than shrub or interspace, probably because we've got right at the edge there, we've got a moderation of temperature by either the shredded material or the cut material. Nevertheless, we have improved growing conditions for both tall perennial grasses and cheatgrass. Kurt Young has done a detailed microsite study with the effects of shredding on 3 sites in Utah associated with sage steppe. And I wanted to give you a little bit of his data here. These dark blue bars here represent shredded. The light blue bars represent untreated or control. And these are wet degree days by season and by microsite. And over here we have N availability over 4 months as measured by resin stakes. And so what you see here in almost every case where you go in and shred, you increase the wet degree days, mainly in the spring, but also in other seasons. And you also increase the N availability. And that increases substantially in litter microsites or old tree canopies. So what you have out here on the landscape is you have these trees as they infill, they produce an island of fertility with greater nitrogen and other nutrients. And then you go and remove the tree's not using those nutrients. You have these patches of fairly high nutrient availability. And you also have improved soil moisture temperature growing conditions. Where you get the shredding or trees, you tend to have interference or a decreased light availability, but you start to get a response, a vegetation response around the edge of these islands of fertility where you have these improved growth conditions. And both perennial herbaceous and cheatgrass can take that up and respond to that. We had this hypothesis that if we went out and shredded the shred material on the top of the ground and the roots that are dying would add enough carbon to the soil, and cheatgrass being an annual and an invasive pioneer annual that likes more resource availability, it might have its growth depressed by creating a high carbon-nitrogen ratio. Well, what we found out is we did increase N availability, but it wasn't necessarily due to the shredding. It was due to removing the trees and removing their use. And we didn't increase the carbon-nitrogen ratio enough to make a difference. Cheatgrass is still able to grow quite well there. However, we have a new shredding project where we're looking at some 50 to 60 sites across Utah at a variety of ages and phases of infilling. And from our first year sampling, Zachary Anderud and Debbie Rigby were able to find out that, in fact, we do decrease N mineralization potential and nitrification potential on the edge of these shredded piles. So there is some decrease in nitrogen potential by shredding, but whether it's enough to really suppress cheatgrass and benefit native grasses, we're not really sure at this point. It doesn't look like that is going to be enough to make a difference in cheatgrass, but if you have enough native perennial herbaceous species there, it could help tip the balance so that the native perennials are dominating rather than cheatgrass. So if you remember this graph on cheatgrass cover, across our network, it increased most by burning, but it also cutting increased cheatgrass cover, especially at higher tree dominance. But that's still, cheatgrass is not dominating on most of our sites. It's kind of patchy. However, there were two sites where cheatgrass dominated. One was the Stansbury site, which was the westernmost juniper-pinyon site in Utah, and the Scipio site down by Beaver. So what I've graphed here for you is the total perennial herbaceous cover minus the cheatgrass cover, and across a tree dominant index at Scipio. And what you see is that a tree dominant index around mid-phase 2, right at 50% or so, the perennial herbaceous and cheatgrass cover is the same, and above that cheatgrass is dominating, and that's concerning to us, of course. That could be where you get recurrent fire that results in dominance by cheatgrass. So we have to ask ourselves, what is it about Scipio and Stansbury that made them so susceptible to cheatgrass dominance at this point? And we're still trying to tease that out. And we do have cheatgrass on all of our other sites, and we have to see what's going to happen over time. And I personally believe it's a little too early to tell what will happen with the other sites. But one thing I did note is both Scipio and Stansbury were in this warmer, wetter category. And we also have some pretty nice patches of cheatgrass at Bridge Creek. But we'll have to sort that out with a longer term and more detailed analysis of the environmental conditions. But it looks like if you're warmer and wetter, you're better fulfilling the fundamental niche of cheatgrass. And if you have a lot of propagule pressure and you don't have enough residual perennials, that could be a concern. Rick Miller's taken another look at this. He's classified the sites as to their soil temperature regime. And what he found is that the sites, which are most of the sites that are frigid, have lower exotic grass cover after burning or cutting, whereas the mesic and thermic sites have higher cheatgrass cover. But again, we'll have to see how that plays out. And Stansbury turned out to not necessarily fit in the category that it had been placed. it seems to be warmer than what it was considered when it was categorized as frigid. So what we have on most of the sites, unlike Scipio, for example, that has a lot of cheatgrass, or Stansberry, is patchiness. And you can see these unholy halos of cheatgrass around the old juniper canopies. And there's a couple of things that are going on here. Here's Marking Corral. This tends to be cooler, drier. The north-facing slope has very little cheatgrass. The south-facing slope has a lot of cheatgrass. There's less perennial grass on this south-facing slope, a lot more here, but it's also warmer here than there. So there's these soil moisture temperature gradients can occur within a site, and fertility gradients also. These are, again, the islands of fertility, so you have nitrogen accumulation there that cheatgrass is going to like. But it doesn't necessarily move in right away. What happens right after a fire is you tend to get this water repellent layer under the canopy, and it tends to sequester or capture nitrogen and hold it up there, and then that breaks down over time after the fire, and cheatgrass is waiting and comes in and colonizes and dominates there. So that's a concern where you have these patches. We hope that those patches will not increase where you have good perennial grass, tall grass, understory, and cover. A couple other things to consider when we're looking at cutting or burning, because cutting comes out pretty good as we look at response of perennials, is what about the sagebrush? Is it coming back? And we have found sagebrush seedlings, and they do seem to be coming back on both the burn and the cut, but we'll have to watch that over time and see what the survival is. That's why continued monitoring is really important. So we hope that that'll be coming back. One of the disadvantages of mechanical treatment, whether you cut and drop or shred, is you can always leave some live buds, and then just like with the old chaining programs, you can only have a certain life to your project because these the trees where the buds weren't entirely taken will grow back. However, maintenance is fairly easy on these kind of stands. You can go in and do some type of lopping. Well, the whole point of doing these treatments and where a lot of the money comes from is to control fuel so that we don't have catastrophic fires. And so we need to look at what those treatments do to the woody surface fuels, and Steve Bunning will be detailing a lot of this. But what you find here, and here we've plotted again a form of tree dominant index, not exactly the same but the same idea. So increasing tree dominance this way, and here are our fuels. And what you find with burning, which are the red lines here, you really reduce your surface fuels. I mean, your best treatment for reducing fuels is prescribed fire. On the other hand, if you go in and cut are the green lines, you really increase your 1,000-hour fuels and your 100-hour fuels, greatly increased by cutting because you're putting all that canopy material on the ground. On the other hand, with shredding, which is the blue lines, you increase the 1 and 10-hour fuels. And all these fuels are increased most where you wait until the infilling is such that you're at a high tree dominant index. So that leads to the concern that you could have subsequent fire by doing a fuel control treatment like this, and there could be an effect. Well, we were able to find that out because in August of 2009, our Stansberry site burned up as part of the 44,000-acre big pole fire. It was a catastrophic fire. It's not one you could stop. The winds raced it across 44,000 acres in a matter of days. Our major measure of fire intensity was soil moisture station enclosures. And so we had 12 of these out there, 3 in each of the 4 treatments. And what we found out is in all of the fuel control treatments except prescribed fire, they melted and destroyed our equipment. What really happened here is in the prescribed fire, though it burned, the fire intensity was much less, and it didn't destroy our equipment. So using that as a measuring gauge, we know that leaving the trees intact, doing nothing, shredding or cutting and dropping can produce subsequent high-intensity fire near the ground, at least enough to burn up your equipment. And you would expect a fire going through this could also have a negative effect if it gets hot enough on the perennial grass buds and tillers. And so we went out and measured this afterwards, and what I'm reporting here is Stansbury cover loss after the big full fire for the 4 different treatments: control, prescribed fire, cut, and shred. And what you quickly see by looking at these different life forms is the green and the purple bars where you had the mechanical treatments versus the red where you had the prescribed fire, or you just had the canopy intact. It was an untreated forest before the fire. You had greater percent cover loss by the mechanical treatments. Therefore, making us concerned that mechanical treatments, putting all this woody, down and dead woody material on the ground with a subsequent fire could negatively affect the perennial herbaceous component. Of course, the shrubs are all gone, whether it was prescribed fire or wildfire. They don't appear here. So that's just a concern, and we need to watch that down the road to see what happens and how well these things, these perennial herbs come back. Because of that risk, and also because if you use prescribed fire, you could greatly reduce your woody material, but also take out your shrubs. Some land managers are doing post-shredding control burns during cooler and wetter times of the year, and they're just going through and doing patch burns and burning these little shred piles. And so there are some management alternatives there that may reduce the woody material left by doing these mechanical treatments. You wouldn't probably do this as well with a cut and drop as you do with a shred, where you can control the fire much better. Also, we're studying effects of shredding across a wider variety of sites than the 4 we have with Sage Steppe, and hope to be able to report on that in the future about those effects. Just to wrap up here now, I just wanted to show you a few photographs of these actual responses on the ground. This is at Onaki. It tends to be kind of medium temperature and on the drier side compared to our other Sage Steppe sites, but we seem to be getting fairly good response there. So I've done this by phase and years after treatment here. So you can see, we're getting, even with our burn, we've got some rabbit brush in here, but we're getting our perennial herbaceous cover coming back, and that's encouraging to us. We were concerned that as you got to phase 3, we wouldn't have much of a perennial herbaceous response, but we seem to be getting that, and that's representative of the other sites also, even though this one's a little bit drier site. Shredding, again, you leave in the shrubs, and you're getting an improvement in perennial herbaceous component. To just summarize then, here's the good and the bad. Burning increased tall grass across phases, mainly 2 and 3, I say 1 there, and perennial herbs. It reduced ground fuels very well, reduced bare ground. The bad is it took out the shrubs and it increased cheatgrass across most of the tree-dominant index. Cutting and shredding maintained the shrubs, increased tall grasses very well, and perennial herbs across mid-phase 2 and on up, reduced bare ground. But it also increased cheatgrass, and it increased fuels, cutting and dropping large fuels, shredding small fuels, and some of the trees are regrowing. So we're not really sure if you can treat phase 3 and have it come back and be dominated by perennial herbs and eventually shrubs. That's why it's important we monitor these down the road, but it looks promising. There are some sites that are definitely more prone to go to cheatgrass, but many of them are not at that point yet, and we really need to watch and see what happens to them. So I don't think we've crossed a biotic threshold with most of our sites, and we'll have to see what happens in the future. So I'm ready for questions. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you, Bruce. All right, the first question, actually a couple people asked, what time of year were the prescribed fires conducted?
The prescribed fires were all conducted in the fall or late summer. They were fairly cool burns because the land management agencies, bless their hearts, did not want to conduct small prescribed fires and have them get away. And I forgot to give you my acknowledgement slides, and I wanted to thank the land management people for conducting these burns and putting up with us. But it was very hard to get them to burn when they were ideal burn conditions. So a lot of them were fairly cool burns, and we had to go back in and reburn to get the burn that we wanted.
Okay, great, thanks. The next question is from Anna Maria Echeverria. Did the plots only include broadcast burning, or did they include pile burning too?
There was no pile burning. It was just broadcast burning, and almost some cases tree to tree and shrub to get it to burn. We had one really good burn, the Stansbury burn, that you see in this upper right-hand corner. That was the end of September, and it backburned across the whole plot, the whole treatment plot, and had a fairly complete burn. But most of them were fairly cool burns.
Okay, thanks. Michael Lesky asks, are there any sites that had a selective cut or harvest of trees, not a clear cut or 100% shred? If so, what was the response?
No, there weren't any of those. However, in our shredding project, we've run into quite a few of those where they were just thinning out trees. We're not sure how that compares. But in the sage step, it was 100% burn, cut, and shred. The only thing that was really different is how much infilling there was on a particular plot when we treated it.
Okay, great, thanks. So that is the last question that I can see. If there are more questions, please type them in your questions box, and I will field them to Dr. Roundy. And while I wait for that, I'll let you know that a recording of this webinar excuse me, will be sent to you automatically through the GoToWebinar system tomorrow, and will also be posted on our Great Basin Science Delivery Project website either sometime this week or early next week. And actually, we're in the process of switching websites, so maybe by the time we have it posted, we'll have our new website up. I'll let you know about that. But if you have more questions regarding this webinar or other topics, please email or call me at any time, and I can forward your questions to Bruce as well. Okay, well, I guess you answered everyone's questions, Bruce, because there aren't any more questions.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you all for attending.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you. Oh, I forgot to submit the polls. Okay, hold on a second, if you don't mind. All right, there are 3 polls, and I will just put them up really quickly. If you don't mind responding to them, I'd really appreciate it. Oh, for some reason, only one of the polls showed up. Oh, here we go. I have the second one. Okay, I'll close this one and launch the last one. And I'll check to see if there are any more questions. Oh, we have some more questions. Are you still available for questions?
Here.
Great, thanks. Okay,
Sure.
Martin Oliver asks, what concern do you have about treatments increasing cheatgrass and then being burned by wildfire? What concern do you have for cheatgrass then becoming more abundant?
Yeah, that's the one that we have. We're in an ideal position to find that out because we have a lot of sites that have some cheatgrass, but they're responding very well to the treatments because the tall grasses and other perennial herbs and shrubs are on the cut are hanging in there and increasing even at high tree dominance. But predicting which ones could end up going to cheatgrass and not, it's going to be a function of how well the perennial herbs use the resources. You saw the graph that showed we still had available resources. If those perennial grasses can continue to increase, and Rick Miller says they're not so much new seedlings as residual grasses that are just increasing in size out there that's increasing the cover. That'll have a big effect. The likelihood of a lightning strike and one site burning versus another. But we're in an ideal position to see how that plays out because we have most of our sites have some cheatgrass, but they're not dominated by cheatgrass, so we'll be able to see what happens in the future as we monitor them for the next 10 years or so. Right now, if you have a pretty good perennial herbaceous understory in your system, I'd be less concerned about cheatgrass. If you don't, I'd be very concerned about it.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from James Webb, and it is one of the key criteria for successful burning and favoring soil moisture. What was the soil moisture on the burns?
Well, it was highly variable, but in general, it was fairly high because we waited to fairly late to do them, and even the one that was done the earliest in August at Marking Corral was after a summer storm, and there was some soil moisture. So except for the Stansbury burn that was done the end of September, I think most of the burns we had some soil moisture. And I'm not sure what the fuel moistures were, but they were fairly high on the Utah burns. So again, they were cool burns, and we had a hard time getting them to go. The response to a wildfire that's much more intense or a hotter prescribed fire might be different. We tended to not get, if you look at Rick Miller's data, he shows that you tend to get a little bit of increase right after the fire, the first year after, and then the perennial herb cover starts coming back up. And what I show here is it comes up in phase 2 and 3 really quite well.
Okay, thanks. All right, well, that is the last question. So again, thank you so much, Bruce, for your presentation, and thank you everyone for answering the polls, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
All right. See you later, everybody.